Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we take a deeper look at the state of public education in South Africa. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report, education in South Africa is ranked 140th out of 144 nations. Stable, quality and functional education appear to be disintegrating so fast in South Africa that many analysts believe the entire government-run educational system will collapse within a decade. If you have trouble believing that, take the time to investigate government education in the Eastern Cape. Education in that province is currently on life support, with most people blissfully unaware of the extent of the crisis. In 2011, the Education Department in the Eastern Cape overspent their budget by a staggering 625 million rand. Their solution to address the budget crisis was to fire 4,000 desperately needed teachers. And despite the Eastern Cape being the worst performing province in the country in 2011, the 2012 academic year began with teachers striking in protest against the 100-to-1 pupil-teacher ratio. The High Court had to eventually intervene to force the Eastern Cape Education Department to reinstate the 4,000 teachers. A report released by the KwaZulu-Natal Education MEC revealed that 17,250 school pregnancies were reported last year in that province. Apparently, teachers are responsible for many of the teen pregnancies. The report also stated that regular raids are conducted at KZN schools where knives, cigarettes and dagga are often confiscated. Many of you are aware of the textbook debacle in Limpopo province, where the Department of Education took more than 6 months to deliver textbooks to schools in that region. Many other provinces are not faring any better. The lack of proper school facilities is a growing problem across the country. Millions of school children are still subjected to appalling learning conditions, with some sitting under trees for lessons. Quality teaching is at an all-time low. The South African Institute for Race Relations recently released the results of a survey they conducted, which shows South African teachers spend less than 50% of their teaching time in class each week. Apparently, parents are increasingly turning to private schools in the hope of giving their children a decent education. Government is failing dismally to fulfill its most fundamental responsibilities to society. But private education itself will not address the startling moral decline in South Africa. The ideology of our educational instruction is probably more important than the standards of our education. Education without godly values produces educated barbarians. When one considers the moral collapse amongst the youth, values-based education becomes the nation's most critical need. But the question most South Africans are asking is, why is the quality and standards of education deteriorating in South Africa so rapidly? We will attempt to answer that question tonight. I will speak to the DA's Annette Lovemore, the official opposition's shadow minister for education in Parliament, about her perspective on the state of education in South Africa. I did request an interview with the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, but at the time of the taping of this show, I did not receive a response. Jackie will speak to David Miller, the chairperson of the National Professional Teachers Organisation of South Africa, or NAPTOSA, about a teacher's perspective of educational standards in South Africa. I will also speak to Graham Yoko, the Chief Executive Officer of Accelerated Christian Education, which oversees more than 700 Christian schools in South Africa and Scandinavia. We also continue our Deconstructing Myths of the Church in History segment with missionary and historian Dr. Peter Hammond. Tonight, we ask Dr. Hammond to reveal Christianity's historical impact on education, on civilization. But before we speak to our guest tonight, here's Jackie Giorgio with our weekly Global News Roundup. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Errol. Good evening and welcome to your Global Christian News Roundup. Recently, a dozen US embassies and Western linked targets were threatened and sieged in international protests, with nearly 4 dozen killed in ensuing violence. The anger quickly crossed borders, with Europe, Asia, and Australia experiencing isolated incidents. All this because of the anti-Muslim film allegedly created by 2 Coptic Christians. The film, originally posted in part on YouTube, has spurred more anti-Western sentiment and calls for violence by extremists like Al-Qaeda and Salafi Muslims. In Libya, protests led to the death of the American ambassador in Benghazi, and further protests in Egypt, Yemen, Pakistan, Sudan, Tunisia, and Turkey. Preliminary investigations into the controversial film and its makers revealed that it was produced by an American religious group, Media for Christ. Following the international violence, the creator of the film, Nakula Baseli, was taken into police custody for questioning. Nakula was apparently motivated to make the film to, quote, expose Islam's evil beliefs. Sadly, the amateurish film, which has questionable links to fraudsters, has had a ripple effect worldwide and is actually an irresponsible provocation of already volatile Muslims. Having said that, the majority of protesters had never seen the film nor even knew of its contents and were simply looking for a reason to spew anti-West vitriol. Right-wing pastor Terry Jones, who caused international outrage last year for burning the Quran outside his church in Florida, was also involved in the movie. We urge all Christians to distance themselves from such pointless provocations and to please pray for their brothers and sisters in Northern Africa and the Middle East who are facing intense persecution because of this film. In local news now, representatives from pro-life congregations and organizations in South Africa are preparing to meet at the annual National Alliance for Life conference taking place on Saturday, 6th of October in Durban. The following day, there will be a life chain march taking place countrywide, and Christians are requested to participate in the annual march, which forms part of an international endeavor to speak up for the preborn. It is expected that tens of thousands of pro-lifers worldwide will join in prayer and protest on International Life Change Sunday. Moving to politics now, the African Christian Democratic Party has urged Christians to speak out against the government's recent proposal to scrap Christian holidays from the annual calendar. President of the ACDP, Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, is appealing to believers to take a stand and preserve the Christian holidays, namely Good Friday and Christmas Day. In the past, Christians did not protest when Ascension Day, which marks the date that Christ ascended to heaven, was removed from the calendar. Now Meshwe is urging Christians to abandon their apathy and to speak up. We appeal to all Christians to write to their local newspaper and government representative and to stand up for the protection of Christian holidays in this country. You can find out more details from Family Policy Institute. Moving to India now, a terrorist group in the region recently released Gospel for Asia pastor Ponachan George, who was kidnapped outside his house a month ago. George is a prominent leader in the region and leads 300 missionaries and oversees 200 churches. He was kidnapped by militant extremists late one afternoon and taken to a nearby forest where he was beaten and held for several days. Gospel for Asia does not negotiate with terrorists, and instead of paying the ransom, its president sent out a prayer request to 400,000 people on their database. Miraculously, the kidnappers decided to then release the pastor, who has since been reunited with his family after recovering from dehydration in hospital. And finally, positive news from Iran, where 34-year-old pastor Yusuf Nadakani is back at home with his family following his release from 1,000 days in jail. Yusuf was arrested 3 years ago for apostasy and sentenced to death for converting to Christianity and attempting to evangelize Muslims. According to Amnesty International and Nadakani's legal team, the Iranian government had offered leniency on the death penalty if he would renounce his Christian faith. However, following an international outcry and widespread protest by human rights organizations, and more importantly, prayer by Christian groups, the Iranian government stalled his execution. Now, despite all odds, the pastor has escaped the death penalty and has been released from 3 years' imprisonment in what many are calling a miracle. He is resting at home with his family and intends to continue pastoring in the community. Your prayers and advocacy have been heard. This is a great victory for Christians to see Pastor Yusuf released. please continue to pray for him and other persecuted believers like him in Iran and the rest of the Middle East. And that's a wrap from Watchmen on the Wall News. Stay tuned for more after the break.
Welcome back. Tonight our guest in the studio is Annette Lovemore, the Shadow Minister for Basic Education in the Democratic Alliance, who is the official opposition in Parliament. Annette, welcome to the studio and thank you for joining us at Watchmen on the Wall.
It's my pleasure, thank you.
Annette, we've been seeing in the media reports of horror stories of textbooks not being delivered, decline in educational standards. Is this reality or is this media scaremongering?
It is reality, unfortunately. It appears in the media as much as it does because it needs to. I am personally responsible for much of the media scaremongering, as you refer to it as. You spoke about textbooks not having been delivered. If you take Limpopo as an example, where the textbooks haven't been, and let me tell you, not all of those textbooks have been delivered yet. Some of the language textbooks have still not been delivered. But I personally have put out over 30 media statements on that particular subject. The reason why I've done that is not to scaremonger, but to make South Africans aware that we have a real problem, to make South Africans aware that they have to stand up and say, we are not going to stand for this. Most South Africans are either parents, or they are grandparents, or they know people with children who are at school. So almost every South African is concerned about education. Almost every South African needs to become involved, and unless that they know that there are serious problems in education, they will not see the need to become involved.
Okay, so you spoke about the Limpopo example.
Yes.
Give us other examples of challenges in education currently in South Africa.
Well, the books problem has been much wider than Limpopo. In the Eastern Cape, which is my home province, for example, the workbooks, which are separate from the textbooks, are meant to supplement the textbooks, or the delivery of workbooks has experienced serious problems. We've had approximately 50,000 Sesotho workbooks delivered in a province where Sesotho is not spoken. So there are problems like that, similar problems with languages in the Free State province. In the Northern Cape, this is a province that I am visiting on a regular basis at the moment. Northern Cape rather, you might well be aware that because of service delivery protests, grade 12 children have been taken away to what might be termed refugee camps, so that they can learn, so that they can study towards their grade 12 exams.
Who's taking them to these refugee camps?
The Education Department.
Is this because there's a collapse in schools?
No, it is because people who are ostensibly protesting against service delivery failures, I say ostensibly because the word on the street is that it is actually tenderpreneurs. It becomes very complex, but nevertheless are using children as political pawns. They are intimidating children and say, if you go to school, we will target you, and they have. We've had 7 homes burnt down. We've had
children being threatened for going to school?
Children being threatened for going to school. The result is that the children have stopped going to school. In the Northern Cape, in the Olifantshoek-Kuruman area, we have approximately 16,000 children who have not been to school for 4 months. What the Department of Education, to their credit, has done is take the children out of the grade 12s, out of the schools to what can only be termed refugee camps, really, only can be termed refugee camps, and they are now learning at those schools.
Do you see any challenges with teaching, the quality of teaching in South Africa?
Certainly we do. It goes back to planning. When you look at teachers, and sourcing of teachers. The Department of Basic Education, and I say this as a fact, not as an opinion, the Department of Basic Education has no idea how many teachers for what subjects we will require in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. There is no such planning in our schools. The result is that there is no concerted effort being made to train whatever teachers we need in particular subjects, it might be in different areas.
So there might be a shortage in certain subjects in the future?
There absolutely will be a shortage. The age cohort with respect to teachers is high. We have the majority of teachers over the age of 40. Over 40% of teachers who are leaving the teaching profession are aged between 30 and 39. And it is estimated that we need approximately 15,000 new teachers in the system every year. We are currently attracting approximately 3,500. So we are not attracting enough teachers, but more than that, we cannot be sure through any measure whether we are attracting teachers in the right subjects, whether we are attracting the right people
to meet
as
the
teachers,
demands of our
to meet the demands, not only current
education.
demands, but future demands.
Now, we've heard the problems and the challenges we face in South Africa. If Annette Lovemore was appointed Minister of Basic Education next week, what would you do to turn this thing around?
The biggest problem throughout every province, starting at school level, at teacher level, at district level, at province level, at national level, is the lack of accountability. Every teacher is meant to have what is called a teacher improvement plan. Every school should have a school improvement plan. So the school would look at what did my pupils score in the annual numeracy tests? What did my pupils score in the annual literacy tests?
What about facilities?
Is my school safe?
Yeah.
Is my school safe? Does my school have proper ablution facilities for my children? Is there safe water for my children to drink? Am I able to provide food? Most schools are not aware what a school improvement plan is, let alone actually implement. Then you go to the next level, which is the district level. At the district level, the district should be looking at all the schools in its district, have a district improvement plan, and so you work your way up to a quality
So you're
level.
saying we're lacking in accountability, in training, improvement, all of those things are currently substandard, and a lot of the challenges we're facing in education as a result of the lack of accountability and people having to give answers for the improvements
Absolutely.
they need to make.
Absolutely. That I am not holding you as a principal or as a district official, I'm not holding you accountable for any changes that need to be made in your school or in your district, etc. And as a result, we are just going along from year to year, accepting results that come along, and children and parents are accepting, most unfortunately, the substandard quality of education, which is absolutely unacceptable.
And that's exactly what we need.
It is the path out of poverty.
Annette, thank you for coming into the studio and sharing your wisdom with us, or a unique perspective on education in South Africa. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
Welcome back and thanks for joining us. We are in our Cape Town studios and tonight I have David Miller with me. David is a school principal as well as the chair of NAPTOSA. David, welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Now for the viewers at home, who is NAPTOSA? What do they do? Tell us a bit about yourself as well.
NAPTOSA is the National Professional Teachers Organisation of South Africa. We have a provincial office. Obviously all 9 provinces have their own offices. We serve the interests of 9,000 teachers, therapists, nurses and workers in the education sector in our province. Nationally, we serve 52,000 members.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. Now, David, we're addressing a very important topic tonight, which is about the crisis in education in our country. And all of us read the papers, we hear what's going on, and, you know, every day it seems that there's teachers striking, we hear of schools being closed down, lack of facilities, textbooks going missing. What are some of the challenges that you notice in your profession?
Low quality education has become a poverty trap. Now, when this government took power in 1994, it promised to catapult the poorest of the poor out of poverty into a future that would improve their life chances. It hasn't happened. And the reason it hasn't happened is because since 1994, we've had 4 ministers of education with different policies. So every time we get a new minister, it seems as if they dance on the grave of their predecessor. Teachers' heads are spinning. They're not sure which way to turn. Curriculum, again, is new. We've been in transition with the curriculum for 16 years, Jackie.
Sure.
16 years in transition. And the minute we get used to a new curriculum, another curriculum comes out. The quality of the curriculum now is really superb. However, a lot of people have gone on record as saying the quality of our teachers does not match the quality of the curriculum. So many of our teachers are failing our children. And I say that with great respect. But if it's been proven that many of our teachers spend 3.5 hours in a classroom at some schools, and the schools in the leafy suburbs are spending 6.5 hours, then it goes to show that we're not actually doing what we need to do to get our poorest children out of poverty. So that's a major challenge. Poor content knowledge of teachers. Now, the government again has gone on record as saying we need to transform, but what they've been doing, they've been reforming education, and I think they've taken the wrong approach. NAPTOSA believes very strongly that transformation of education is the #1 priority now. We need stability. Our teachers need to know this is the curriculum. Let's settle with this curriculum, a stable curriculum. We can go into a classroom and teach. But again, the poor content knowledge has to be addressed. And there's many solutions that NAPTOSA is seeking in partnership with not only the provincial government, but national government to rectify that.
David, from some of the challenges that you've given to us, it seems that the training and the education of teachers is actually a core problem. How are teachers actually able to get into the classrooms if they're not being trained properly?
This has been a major problem for many years, and with the changes in the curriculum, teachers have been trained into oblivion. And NAPTOSA believes that you train monkeys, you don't train teachers. Teachers need to be professionally developed. So what has happened is we still have the legacy of Bantu education. We still have to upskill a lot of our teachers. And to the credit of many of our teachers, that's happening. They're getting to the required level of 4 years of post-school qualification so that they can teach. The problem, the concern is the number of teachers who are not actually at school on time teaching and prepared. If you look at the good schools in this country, 600 schools continue to outperform 26,000 schools. And that's consistently for the last 16 years. Now, professional development is something that we're very passionate about as an organisation. And in 2008, NAPTOSA was part of an initiative at the Teachers Development Summit to create commissions that could walk away and say, what do our teachers need? To resolve the issue of low-quality education, we have to look at delivery of the curriculum. We have to look at teaching and learning in the classroom. So it's not as cut and dried as to say that our teachers are ill-prepared, our teachers are underqualified or unqualified. It's really a case of getting our teachers to a position in their own professional lives where they are professionally developed. Departmental training, again with exceptions, is notoriously very bad. You speak to any teacher, you might get 2 or 3 out of 10 saying they enjoyed the training, it was good training. The majority would say it was a complete waste of time.
And I see, you mentioned as well, it's a cultural change because people have to be passionate about their job and about the calling that they have to education. Now, you did mention that NAPTOSA actually does professional development. What does this entail? Is it free? Can any teacher join it? How does it work?
Absolutely anybody can come to professional development sessions. We have appointed an executive officer of professional development in our province. Her name is Lynn Herman. Our office is in Rondebosch in Park Road. So what we have a whole professional development program that we release at the beginning of a term, some at the beginning of a year, so teachers can plan their professional activities based on their need for that particular year.
Realistically speaking, do you think that in the next 10 years our education system can improve? Do you think that there is a bit of hope for us in South Africa?
You're talking to an eternal optimist. There's always hope. There has to be hope. 10 years? No. 15 to 20 years, 25 years possibly. If you look at the new strategy that's been released again by the national government, they talk about meeting targets by 2025. Unfortunately, this government keeps shifting the targets. Targets for 2012 weren't met, so let's shift them to 2015. They weren't met, let's shift them further and further on down the line. What NAPTOSA approves of is the National Development Plan. So the National Planning Commission, under the leadership, the very strong leadership of Mr. Trevor Manuel, has released a plan. It's in Chapter 9 of the National Development Plan, and any teacher can read that. And it contains some really good practical implementation strategies that can turn education around as long as there's the political will, as long as we stop cadre deployment, as long as we stop principals being appointed based on the union they belong to and not based on merit. Then there's real hope. But we've really got to start looking long and hard at how we promote people, how we establish strong leadership in our schools, because strong leadership in our schools results in really strong teaching. And those leaders in our schools need to be more responsible for discipline, not only of the pupils, but of the teachers as well.
Clearly, if it's going to take between 10, 15, maybe even 20 years to see real change on every level in education and in schools, parents certainly then need to come to the party. What role do you see parents playing in helping their children's education?
Jackie, that's an excellent question. I don't think parents have bought into their own role as co-owners of the school. When legislation, or let's say when the change happened in this country, schools were given to parents. Many parent communities haven't bought into that. So if you want to transform education, a parent community has to go into a school. If that school is going to be the centre of a community, that means that every parent has to go to school, has to buy into that school, has to take part in parent-teacher association meetings, raise funds for the school, get involved in school governing bodies. The legislation is very strong that parents own the schools. If parents own the schools to a greater degree and got more involved, we could address issues such as 20% of teachers in this country being absent on a Friday and a Monday. How as a parent could you accept that? As a principal, I never would. So I'm one of the lucky few where my staff are there, whether they're dying or not. But surely parents have to hold their schools accountable. So the legislation is there. And that's the strength of our current policy. The government has created a policy that is incredibly strong, very much pro-parent. But if our parents don't take the lead, how can you leave your child at a school, drop them off, and expect the school to do the education?
Yeah.
Education starts at home. It doesn't start at school. School is an extension of education a child receives at home. So my appeal would be that parents get involved in the education of their children by taking ownership of the school in which their children, or to which their children go.
Well, David, thank you for your time today and for those very encouraging words, but also somber words. I think that we need to take cognizance of that. And for the parents and the viewers at home, I think what today has been is a reality check for us to realize that we can either choose to react to the situation of education that we see in our country and we can lose hope, or we can actually become proactive about it. And in a country where you've got, on average, between 35 children up to, in some schools, 60 children for every one teacher, we as parents and as individuals have to take ownership. We need to get involved. We need to support our teachers and our principals. We need to pray for them. And we need to actually get involved with our children's education. Keep watching and we'll return after the break.
Welcome back. Good to have you back with us. In the studio with us, we're privileged to have Dr. Peter Hammond, noted historian, author, and missionary. Peter is helping us in our segment entitled Deconstructing the Myths of the Church in History. Peter, good to have you back with us, and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall.
Thank you, Errol. Always good to be with you.
We're talking about education, or more importantly, the crisis in education. Now, we've known over the past 18 years in democratic South Africa that God has been expelled from our schooling system. We've got rid of biblical instruction, we've got rid of religious teaching, and the rationale for that by educationalists is that we're going to improve education if we do that. Has it improved education in South Africa?
Well, I don't think there's anyone in our country who could say that education's improved over the last 18 years. When you take away the biblical foundations and the law of God and the moral character-building foundations of Christian education, how can you improve it? What they have done is made rods for their own backs, because what is secular evolutionism but saying you came from nothing, you're going nowhere, life is meaningless? How do you build a good education on that? How do you have Christian work ethic? How do you inspire teachers even, or students, on a basis of secular humanism, situation ethics, and a chance meaningless universe? So
would you go as far as saying that the kind of decline and crisis we're seeing in education in South Africa today is a direct result of removing biblical instruction in schools?
Yes, I would. In fact, the warning was given very eloquently 500 years ago by the German reformer Martin Luther. Martin Luther said in this spectacularly relevant quote, "I'm much afraid that schools will prove to be wide gates to hell unless they labor diligently in engraving the youth with Scripture, unless they diligently labor in explaining the Holy Scriptures. I advise no one to place his child where the Scriptures do not reign paramount. Every institution in which they are not constantly occupied with the Word of God must become corrupt.
Wow,
now,
that's
500
powerful.
years ago, Dr. Martin Luther warned us of the devastating consequences of taking away the scriptural foundations for education.
Give us some examples of the impact of Christian education in nations around the world.
Well, first and foremost, the Christian church has been the greatest movement in the history of the world for literacy and for education. In fact, Christianity invented schools for boys and girls, for all classes and for all genders. Before that, there was no such thing as education for all. It was only Christianity that innovated the whole idea that education should be for both the high and the low born, both
Education for the masses?
all, and for girls as well. In fact, even in the time of Augustine, it was said in the 4th century, Christian girls are better educated than male philosophers. And this has always been the heritage of the church. Wherever the church has gone, they've planted the school. In fact, the Great Commission is inseparably linked to education. The Lord commanded us to make disciples of all nations, teaching them. And so education has always been at the heart of the mission of the church. In fact, the mission of the church was always known by 3 pillars: schools, hospitals, and churches, ministering to body, mind, and spirit. And so the church would plant first a hospital, and then a school, and finally a church, because they ministered to the body, the mind, and the spirit. This is comprehensive fulfillment of the Great Commission. It is a tragedy that in just living memory, churches have abandoned their priority of having schools. In the past, every church had a school. It was just part of the function of a church.
And why do you think that is? Why are churches moving away from educating the masses?
I think it's a superficial understanding of the Scriptures, a superficial understanding of the nature of God and of the Great Commission. Unfortunately, we've moved into an instant coffee type generation where everything's got to be quick, easy, and it's materialistic. It's got to be now. It's my personal experience now. And so this existentialism in society has unfortunately infected the church. So instead of the church having a long-term generational vision, multi-generational vision, God is revealed as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're meant to think not just of your children, but of your grandchildren's generation. You're meant to think multi-generations. Take these teachings that I've given to you, Paul said to Timothy. Entrust them to reliable men who will be able to entrust them to other reliable men. This is what the church always was. And now it's a matter of, let's have a quick fix instead of laying foundations for future generations.
And there's no quick fix with education. Tell us about some of the important learning institutions globally that started out as Christian institutions.
All of the great universities in the world were invented by Christianity. In fact, the very name university, the etymology of the word shows its Christian origins. Uni veritas, one truth in Latin. Oxford, which was started at the Oxen Ford on the river, that was an old Christian monastery, a mission station. It was turned into one of the greatest universities in the world, as was Cambridge, as was Harvard, as was all the great universities, Princeton. You can name every university in the world. They founded, almost all of them, like 98%, on Christian foundations. Christianity invented not only education for the masses, but the very concept of higher education.
So what is your solution for South Africa's educational crisis?
Back to the Bible. And not only back to the Bible, for moral character foundations in young learners, but get the parents back involved. Nobody loves or cares for the children more than their own parents. And children haven't been made in the image of the state, they've been made in the image of God. And children are entrusted to the parents. The parents should be more involved in the education of children. And we're not just talking about the Parents Teachers Association raising money through cake sales for uniforms for the school play or something. They're meant to be monitoring the education of the children, which means the teachers and the textbooks that are going to mold the minds of the future voters. You cannot entrust any state, any government, any political party with the molding of the minds of the future voters. It's wrong to have politicized education. Our children should not be Play-Doh in the hands of some social engineering experiment of some politicians. How many millions of our children have had their futures undermined by this political experimentation? Everyone said at the time, outcome-based education, OBE 2005, is going to fail. And it didn't work. And yet our children's education is being so undermined that now your matric's not taken seriously. You've got to do extra entrance qualifications. Overseas, they're not recognizing South African university education as they used to in the past because they know that the standards have been undermined.
Yeah.
So we've hurt our entire economy and the future of our children. We need to get parents back involved. So let the parents be fully involved in the choosing of the textbooks and the teachers and supervising them, and recognize that children are in the hands of the parents and they're answerable to God. We can delegate the task of educating our children, but we can never delegate the responsibility.
I agree with that. Peter, thank you for coming into the studio and sharing a historical perspective on education in South Africa. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. We are privileged to have in the studio as our guest tonight Graham Yoko, the Chief Executive Officer of Accelerated Christian Education. Graham, welcome to Watchmen on the Wall, and thank you for joining us from KwaZulu-Natal.
Thank you very much, Errol. It's great to be with you, and good evening to the viewers.
Graham, tell us a little bit about ACE. What do you guys do?
Well, Accelerated Christian Education is an organization that partners together with churches and communities to provide Christian education institutions.
So you don't run the schools yourself?
We don't run the schools.
You
we
provide the curriculum?
Provide the curriculum, that's correct.
Which is values-based education?
Absolutely. The curriculum is saturated with morals, values, character training, and most importantly, it's based on the Word of God.
Graham, you've seen in the media the challenges we're having in South Africa with education, and we've spoken to the DA's Shadow Minister for Education and also a few other people in the studio earlier on. What is your perspective on the crisis, if you believe there's a crisis firstly, and what we should be doing about strengthening education in South Africa and turning around so that we're not going down but perhaps improving?
Well, it's interesting, Errol, that you mentioned that, because this is not a situation or phenomenon that's unique to South Africa. It seems as though around the world, education is on the decline, despite all the technological advancements and so on.
Are you saying that education is declining in nations across the world? Is that standards, content, infrastructure?
I would hazard a guess that that is the reality, because even in first world countries like the USA, this is where the decline began, and it all began when God was taken out of the schools. Back in 1962, there was a milestone court case, and what happened was God was removed from the schools.
And prayer was removed out of American schools. I remember that.
And it was at that time that Accelerated Christian Education began to become established in the United States at that particular time.
As a response to that?
As a response to that, there was secular humanistic teaching that was taking place in schools, and Christian parents, and particularly Dr. and Mrs. Howard, who established the program, began to look for an alternative. So what they did was they took the academic curriculum and then they added God's Word into it so that it was woven right through the curriculum, not added to it as a separate subject.
If you could compare the schools that you have oversight of in ACE compared to public education, our government-run schools, do you see a difference?
Well, the first thing that I would see is that our program is based on mastery education, which means a student actually has to master something before they move on. And in addition to that, we have character and moral value training. So the students are learned to live life from God's point of view and from God's Word, as opposed to just whatever feels good to do it.
Graham, what do you say to the argument that Christian education is substandard? It's not the same academic standard as education out there.
Well, I think we have to measure apples with apples. And the ideal way of measuring the academic standard of a curriculum or program is when those students leave and go on to university, and they are then subject to what universities will present them.
And what have the results been like?
Well, we've had independent research done, and it's been interesting that less than 5% of the students that graduate from schools using the AC program drop out of university in the first year. So 95% of them stay with the course that they have committed themselves to. And then Further to that, another 95% of the students complete their course in the minimum period of time, which is very unique. The dropout rate for first-year students from conventional schools is nearly 40%. And likewise, a number of students, probably in the same region, would take longer to complete their degree studies than conventional, than ACE students.
That's phenomenal.
So we're teaching them to set goals and achieve those goals. Life skills and the academic standard across the disciplines in a university are extremely high.
So you're saying Christian education is more than equal to education out there?
Absolutely. When God is in charge, we don't have to stand back for anybody.
And ACE, if there's any churches out there that want to start schools, can contact you, Graham Yoker at Accelerated Christian Education, and you will help them with curriculum and all the other mechanisms they need to start a school?
Absolutely. We have a team that are ready to assist any church that wants to start a school. And I think churches need to also understand that it is their constitutional right, and also according to the South African Schools Act, they are fully enabled to start schools. But we need some pastors, some groups that will say, we'll take
visionaries.
Some visionaries.
Yeah.
To make it happen.
Yeah, to get involved in education. Graham, we want to thank you for visiting us here at Watchmen on the Wall and sharing your knowledge with us about education and how we can find solutions to it. So stay with us. We'll be back after the short break. Welcome back. As you have heard from our guest tonight, educational standards in South Africa are in a downward spiral. A nation without quality education is a nation without a future. The question many South Africans are asking is this: why is the quality and standards of education deteriorating so rapidly in South Africa? And the answer is quite simple. When the God of the Bible was expelled from the educational system in South Africa, along with his protective moral values and principles, we opened the door to every conceivable evil. When you remove the protective boundaries of value-based education that instructs young people in righteousness, you have to replace it with something else. The frightening decline of educational standards and moral values in South Africa, in the educational system, is easily explained when we understand the ideological basis of our current educational instruction. South African schools and tertiary institutions have become an ideological battlefield. Two incompatible worldviews are in a life and death battle for the hearts and minds of our future generations. On the one side is the biblical Christian worldview, articulating the culture of life that Jesus promised in John chapter 10, verse 10. And on the other is the liberal, secular, humanistic agenda that promotes a culture of death. Educational instruction without a strong moral foundation can only produce educated barbarians. The young man who gunned down 12 people in cold blood in Colorado in the United States recently was highly educated. But his godless education did not prevent him from becoming a mass murderer. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7 declares, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Educational instruction without the knowledge and the fear of God is producing a society bereft of values and responsibility. The Christian church was always actively involved in education. In fact, education for the masses is a Christian principle. The world's leading educational institutions were established by ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ historically. Family Watch International, a pro-family watchdog group at the United Nations, released a report recently exposing the radical agenda of anti-family groups. UN agencies like the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, or UNICEF, and the United Nations Population Fund, with assistance from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, are lobbying for explicit graphic sexuality education in schools of all member nations. Already, a group funded by Sweden are promoting sex education for 5-year-old children in South Africa. But what is the ideological basis of this godless so-called sex education? Sharon Slater of Family Watch International writes, and I quote, It has been difficult to write this report on the outcomes of the recently concluded meeting of the United Nations Commission on Population and Development. I am concerned that some of the policies adopted will cause great harm to adolescents and youth around the world. Positive references to the importance of mothers, abstinence and fidelity, as well as references condemning pornography and prostitution, were all removed from the final document. References to condoms, contraception and commodities all remained, with no mention of encouraging youth to refrain from early sex. Positive references to the important role fathers play and to the importance of the family in the development of children were either removed or corrupted by additional language. Multiple references to family planning and abortion remained in the document. Particularly disturbing was language that was accepted protecting the purported human rights of adolescents and youth to have control over and decide freely and responsibly on matters related to their sexuality, including sexual and reproductive health. This phrase is interpreted by sexual rights activists and UN bureaucrats to establish a right for children as young as 10 to be able to decide for themselves when, where, with whom, and with which gender they would like to have sex." End quote. This is a clarion call for the Church of Jesus Christ to rescue education in this country from certain disaster. The Church must establish value-based learning institutions to arrest the moral decline in South Africa. You and I are God's standard bearers. We have to raise the standards of righteousness in our educational environment to ensure a better future for our children. Please take a bold and uncompromising stand today and reclaim education in South Africa for the sake of our children and the glory of Jesus Christ. And that's my summary. Please look out for the latest Joy magazine on sale now in all your major retailers. And also look out for the article I wrote on education entitled Redeeming Education in South Africa. Please subscribe to my weekly newsletter, Watchmen on the Wall, by visiting our website, familypolicyinstitute.com. You can also join the official Family Policy Institute page on Facebook to post your comments. Please support the March for Life in Cape Town and Durban on Sunday, the 7th of October. It is time for the Church of Jesus Christ to make a bold and decisive stand for life in South Africa. And that's our show this week. Please tune in next week, Tuesday, for another episode of Watchmen on the Wall. Remember, keep standing. Good night and God bless you.